No, John shook his head. That one wasn't a riddle, it was just a trick. One-story houses don't have stairs. No, he needed to impress Mr. Griffin with a harder riddle. The hardest riddle John knew was his dad's favorite. What has 4 legs in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 in the evening? It was the famed riddle of the Sphinx, and John knew as soon as he said it that he'd tricked Mr. Griffin. Until Mr. Griffin frowned and said, "A pirate, of course. We all know those peg legs aren't worth the wood they're carved from." John's eyes widened. The answer went like this. A man crawls on all 4 as an infant, thus in the morning, and then he walks on 2 legs during the middle of the day, and then, which is his life, and then he walks with a cane as an old man, thus the evening. Since a pirate was a man, Mr. Griffin was correct. If overly specific, it was. John sighed and he let his shoulders droop a little. "Ha!" Mr. Griffin kicked the floorboards, making his chair jump. "I can tell from the look on your face that I'm right. Too bad for you. With your clever riddle, I win. And I don't have to tell you anything." John's mom pulled the knife out of the desk and flipped it again. "It's a tie. We need a tiebreaker." "A tiebreaker?" Mr. Griffin squawked and squirmed away from the knife. "You won." "Oh, I won. You lost." "He beat your riddle, and you beat his riddle. It's a tie." John's mom leaned her head towards her shoulder. She flipped the knife and caught it by the handle. "Fine, but this is the last one," Mr. Griffin argued. "When you look for something, why is it always in the last place you look?" "Oh, sorry, this is John's mom. When you look for something, why is it always in the last place you look?" John's mom asked. "Easy, because we look in the treasure chest last," Mr. Griffin said. "Wrong!" John yelled. "Wrong?" Mr. Griffin pulled out his bonds, his beaked nose bobbing up and down. "Everyone knows that things of value are kept in a treasure chest. I'm correct and you have to let me go." "No," said John. "The answer is because when you find something, you stop looking, which makes it the last place you looked." Mr. Griffin thrashed in his chair, stomping the floorboards. "It was a trick. I won't settle for it. The 2 of you are running a rig on me. You planned that riddle from the beginning." "You still got it wrong," John's mom said. "Even though we didn't plan it, you have to tell me what island you rescued me from." "No, too bad for you." Mr. Griffin bit the air in front of him. "I can't tell you." "Can't or won't?" John's mom took a step towards Mr. Griffin, knife in hand. "Mom, don't!" John said. She glanced at him and then back at Mr. Griffin. "Mary, don't!" John said. "Mr. Griffin, you're the quartermaster. You know everything this ship does." "Books and schedules aren't the same as islands and locations. Besides, the log for Waidia was lost at sea when the boat sank. There's nothing I can do to help you. And this whole time, I've been tapping out a distress code on my chair. The crew's gonna break the door open and rescue me any minute." Mr. Griffin grinned. John's mom kicked the quartermaster squarely in the chest, sending his chair tumbling over backwards. He landed with a sickening thud. She squatted next to him, driving the knife into the floorboard. "Someone has to be able to find the island I was rescued from." Mr. Griffin's eyes pinched shut to near slits. "Sure, someone probably can." "Tell me now!" she yelled. And John stepped around the captain's table and put a hand on his mom's shoulder, whispering to her, "Mom, please don't You're frightening me. She looked over her shoulder at John, her dark eyes filled with intensity. John squeezed past her, put his hand on the knife, and pulled it from the floorboard. John tossed it across the cabin. We're not after treasure. We don't want your charts or anything like that, John said. He knew he couldn't tell Mr. Griffin about the magical pirate chest and expect anything but laughter. So he thought hard as to what him and his mom could be after that a pirate wouldn't want. What did his mom keep in the dresser in her room? Perfumes, lotions, pictures? When she was shipwrecked, John said, she lost a locket. One with he couldn't say picture, could he? What did his mom always say? The word came to him. A painting of her lost husband. She desperately wants the painting of her lost husband back, to remember. Was it a gold locket? Mr. Griffin asked. Gold would be too valuable. John thought hard, remembering what some costume jewelry might have been made out of. It was made of pewter, he said. Bah! Leave it to a woman to look for sentimental garbage. Mr. Griffin shook his head in disappointment. Even men can be sentimental, John said. What about you? Have you ever loved someone? Me? Mr. Griffin's eyes opened wide and his mouth spread in a maniacal grin. In love. You're calling up the wrong mast. I don't believe that, John said. You love your mother. My mother died in childbirth, Mr. Griffin said. Your father, then? My father sent me to a boarding school. Mr. Griffin looked away. John considered his own father's words about boarding school. He wanted you to learn discipline, so you'd be a successful man, John said. You don't know anything about my father, Mr. Griffin yelled. I know you'd do anything for one last look at him, John said. That locket has a painting of my father in it. Tell me how to find it. Fine, Mr. Griffin sniffled. Help him up, John said. His mom helped to tip the chair back up to its legs. Mr. Griffin stared at the mother and son team, tears lining his eyes. But you can't tell anyone I helped you. It'll be our little secret, John's mom said. Rusty Jones was the navigator on Wide-Ya, Mr. Griffin admitted. Rusty? John's mom shook her head. Rusty couldn't find his way out of a pub, let alone across the sea. Rusty's the only one who knows the location of Treasure Island, the place where we rescued you, Mr. Griffin said. Chapter 7. Luck, really. Who's Rusty Jones? John asked. He was a navigator for England's Royal Navy. A blow to his head knocked most of his wits loose, his mom said. Well, how do we find him? Well, he's all the way back in Nassau, she said. Where we just came from, John slumped his shoulders. With the Dragon of Plunder under siege and him and his mom on the Queen Anne's Revenge, John didn't see how they would get back to Nassau. Well, what do we do? John, we sail, she said. Good luck with that, Mr. Griffin added. Now that my mates have been alerted to my chair stomping, they'll flood this cabin and send both of you to the plank. John glanced nervously at the door. He's bluffing. I am not. John, how many pirates did Blackbird take with him? At least a couple dozen. Did you see any other on the ship? She continued. 4, maybe 5, John said. My guess is they're the only ones who aren't any good in a fight. Ha! Hardly. Nice try. Mr. Griffin rocked in his chair. Blackbeard always leaves his very most dangerous pirates aboard in case of situations just like this. Like you? John's mom found a chest full of pistols near the door. She checked the charge in each one and began sliding them into her belt sash. "Do I get one of those?" John asked. "No," she said. "In fact, get rid of your toy. I don't want someone shooting you by accident." "Toy?" Mr. Griffin strained at his bonds again. John looked sheepishly at the plastic flintlock gun. He shrugged. "It got you, Mr. Griffin." "Huh." "John, I'm going to need you to do exactly as I say." "Okay, I'm ready," John said. "Good. Here's what we're going to do. We're stealing the Queen Anne's Revenge." She smiled. "What?" "You heard me." John's mom crossed the cabin, knife in hand, unbolted the main door, and opened it to the deck. "Help! Help!" Mr. Griffin yelled as soon as the door opened. John's mom ignored him and instead drew one of her 4 pistols, aiming it in the general direction of the 4 pirates, who were huddled behind one of the main deck cannons. "You there! Come out with your hands up!" John heard the pirates conversing in hushed tones. One of them yelled, "Oh, I can't do that." "Why not?" "Blackbeard will keelhaul the whole lot of us," the pirate's voice wavered. "You all know my name. I'm Mary the Unmerciful." She fired the flintlock pistol. A rope snapped and a sail unfurled behind the pirates. She dropped now. The empty pistol, flintlock, only carried a single bowl and charge, so she pulled out another pistol from her belt sash. "You'll get no more warnings from me." The 4 pirates jumped from their hiding place with their hands in the air. "We surrender," they all said in unison. "Good. Now, man the capstan. We're weighing anchor." She flicked the pistol toward the front of the ship. The crew grumbled but fell in line to a large cylinder with wood spokes near the front of the ship. "Heave to," John's mom said. The men then put their shoulders to the beams and started walking in a circle, singing as they moved. "Heave a pow, oh heave away, away, yay, we roll and go. Anchors on board and the cables are stored. Time be rollin', ticky randy dandy, oh." As the pirates sang their shanty song, John listened to the slow clink of the chain pulling into the ship. This was pulling up the anchor. He ran to the gunwale to see the anchor chain reaming on the sea floor. "This is taking forever," he yelled at his mom. "Calm down. It takes as long as it needs," she said. "Blackbeard's going to know we're pulling up the anchor." "We're hoisting the anchor, and I'm counting on it." "You are?" "I want him to chase us." "You do?" She walked over to him, lowered her voice to a whisper so that the pirates wouldn't hear over their singing, and told him, 2 people can't manage a ship this size. These 4 might be afraid of me now, but it won't last. We need Blackbeard to chase us so the Dragon of Plunder can sneak away." "So what should we do?" John asked. "Just keep watch. Tell me when Blackbeard comes near." John looked back towards the Dragon of Plunder. The next several minutes were tense as the anchor chain was cranked into the ship. It didn't take long for Blackbeard's longboats to start the trip back. John reported to his mom, who merely nodded as the ship started to move. "Anchor's out the bottom," she said. "You men, get into the captain's quarters." She flicked the pistol to show them towards the open door. They stopped singing and they marched off. Once the door closed, his mom said, "John, I want you to bar the door shut." John took one of the bars out of the capstan and ran it back to the captain's quarters, where he jammed the bar between the handles until it was snug. He looked around for his mom, and he saw her lowering the forward sail. Wind caught the sail, and the ship surged forward ahead, out of the cove and into the pale green waters of the Caribbean. His mom raced back across the deck, took the ladder to the quarterdeck, and manned the ship's wheel. John followed her by saying, "That was amazing how you shot the rope." "Luck, really," she said. "I was aiming at their feet. These guns have no accuracy." "And now you know how to sail this pirate ship." He jumped up and down with excitement, bouncing from foot to foot. "You'll learn too, in time," she said. "How close is Blackbeard?"